Dit is Ergens Over Radio.
Een andere kijk op de wereld.
You're listening to Pateo Radio.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Pateo Radio. The broadcast of tonight is about Jesus, and my guest is a specialist on that subject, but it's a little bit different than most people think. But let me first introduce my guest. It's Mr. Joseph Atwell. Joe, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Johan.
I'm very delighted that you could participate tonight. For the listeners who are not familiar with who you are, can you give a little bit of a description of you as a person and what you do in your daily life?
Well, as little as possible. I would describe myself simply as a scholar. I am very interested in the origins of religion, and I'm very interested in placing religion within a political context. So I am the author of a book called Caesar's Messiah, The Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus. It's published in other languages under different titles, but the book has the thesis that the character Jesus Christ and the Gospels themselves were the product of a particular family of Roman Caesars, and they had a political motivation for creating what we have come to know as Christianity. Exactly.
So I think we will talk mostly about this subject in this radio broadcast, Joe. I don't know where to start. I know a little bit of the subject myself. For instance, I think most people know that the Gospels were originally written in Greek, in the Greek language, and the abbreviation of the first three letters of that word, Jesus, is IHS in our own alphabet. And when you Google on those three letters IHS, for instance, or whatever, any other search engine is also good, and you look for images, then you find a lot of images with those three letters, IHS in the center, and the sun around it. So to me, it's clear that's a reference to the central star in our solar system. But can you make a start with this? How did you came across the idea that Jesus was not actually a man of flesh and blood, but was somehow something different?
Well, I was raised a Catholic, or at least I went to a Catholic school as a child, and so I studied the Gospels, and later on I just sort of fell away from the faith, but always retained a kind of curiosity about the historical character Jesus Christ. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and there was a period of time during which everyone was waiting for certain translations to come forward, and the years just kept going on, and they never brought forward the expected translations of these certain Dead Sea Scrolls. I became curious as to why these translations weren't being given to the public, and started reading books about the subject. There are a lot of conspiracy books, as to what was in the scroll material that wasn't being released. Mm-hmm. But when I was doing my research, I came across the interesting fact that there was a messianic movement in the first century in Judea that was militaristic and fought against the Romans. And this is the literature that the Dead Sea Scrolls represents. It's very militaristic. It does have a Christ figure, but he's not a turn the other cheek sort of individual. In fact, he's would be leading a movement that would be trying to drive the Romans out of Judea. And so that just seemed odd to me that I had studied a pacifistic Christ in the first century Judea, because the religion, Judaism, is very militaristic. The Torah has all of these military warriors as heroes, and so the fact that out of that religion would come someone that would want to cooperate with Rome and pay taxes to Caesar and to turn the other cheek, it just seemed strange to me. And so I began studying not only the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I went back to the Gospels. And when you study the Gospels and you try to make sense of them in a political context, really the only book that you can use for this process is the histories of a character called Josephus, Flavius Josephus, because he has the only first century material that describes Judea. And so when I was reading this historian's description primarily of the war between the Romans and the Jews, which took place between 66 and 73 CE, I noticed that there were a lot of events that Jesus either predicts or experiences that seemed like very close parallels to the events that Josephus was recording in the history of the war. And so when I began to do a little closer analysis of this, I realized at a certain point that the entire adult ministry of Jesus, all of the events, were developed from the war. In other words, Jesus makes direct prophecies about the war. The Jerusalem's going to be encircled with a wall. The temple's going to be razed. There's going to be something like the abomination of desolation that the prophet Daniel predicted. The Galilean towns will be destroyed, and so these events actually come to pass in the war. And then I noticed something odd, which hadn't really been noticed by general scholarship, which is simply that all of the events in Jesus' ministry that are predictions of the war take place in the same sequence that they actually occur in the war. So at that point, I could see that, well, wait a second, this isn't history. This is just the victors writing history. The Gospels are just another iteration of that old principle that the victors write history. In this case, it was a little unusual because they wrote the history as a prophecy. In other words, they predict their victory rather than just writing it as a history. So I then started to look at the Gospels and determined that it was all a particular kind of genre of literature. And this is really the big mystery of the Gospel, the big secret in back of it. It's nothing hocus pocus. It's very, very simple. Any normal reader can determine this. And that's simply that Jesus is a typologic character. And the events that the Gospels describe about him are not historical events. They're typological. And in the first century, in going back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are a lot of typologic prophecies. In other words, someone will look back into the Old Testament or the Torah, and they'll see events that the author of, say, for example, the book of Habakkuk is writing about. And then they will take those events as a pattern and try to place them in the present context. So in other words, they would see someone, a Christ-like figure they called the righteous teacher, and this individual would have events that are parallels. They're very close in nature to the events that Habakkuk had. And so then the author would then extend out the pattern, and you could look into the future, and you could, make predictions about the righteous teacher based on the fact that he was having these parallels with someone in the past. Well, the Romans just, they use that technique to predict themselves. If you look at the Gospels, there's a big mystery in them. Scholars don't talk about it much, but it's sitting right in front of any alert reader. Jesus makes predictions about someone that he calls the Son of Man, which is simply a title for the Christ, that's going to come before the generation that is listening to the words Jesus is speaking passes away, right? Mm-hmm. So the Son of Man is going to come, and when he comes, he's going to have all he's going to be accompanied with all these apocalyptic events. These are all the apocalyptic events that Jesus predicts. But the character Jesus Christ, he is not the Son of Man. He doesn't come back. There's no historical record of him coming back and being there when these events, which are all from the war, take place. But there was an individual who did claim to be the Jewish Christ. All of his court historians maintain that claim, that all the Jewish prophecies that predicted the Christ foresaw this individual. And he did do he essentially accomplished all of the predictions that Jesus said would be associated with this Son of Man's visitation. And this guy's name is Titus Flavius. He's a Roman Caesar, claims to be the Jewish Christ. He's the one who laid low the Galilean towns. He encircled Jerusalem. He raised the temple structure. He brought about what Jesus predicted in terms of the abomination of desolation. And all of the events that Jesus predicts occur in his campaign, his military campaign, and they occur in the same sequence. So when you just look at this, you can see that, well, obviously, the same group that produced Flavius Josephus' histories produced the Gospels as well. And suddenly the Gospels make perfect sense. The religion now makes perfect sense. It's simply a Roman psychological operation to try to pacify the Messianic movement that was rebelling against the Roman Empire.
Whoa. So what you're actually saying, Joe, is that in French it's called l'histoire se répète, the history is repeating itself.
Right.
That somehow events reoccur on this planet, and by using those prototypical stories and fitting it in yourself, you're able to use that for your own beneficiary, for your own goals, so to say.
Exactly. It's easy to be a prophet if you can put your characters in the past.
Exactly.
It doesn't take any effort at all. And so that's what they did. They just created this absurd character. And Jesus Christ, if you look at this individual coming from Judaism in the first century, is simply absurd. It's not, it couldn't possibly be a real historical character. But they established their prophet 40 years in the past, and so they could have him do predictions. Now, it's really easy for readers to verify that the Gospels are in fact produced by this family of Caesars, because Jesus says that the Son of Man is going to come before the generation who's hearing his words passes away. Well, a generation to Jews in this era is 40 years. 40 years is the classic number in Hebraic literature. All of the cycles occur within 40 years. And if you look at the date the Gospels suggest Jesus is crucified, it's Passover of 33 CE. Well, just go forward 40 years in time, and what do you see? You see Passover 73, the end of the Roman-Jewish War, on that very day. That's the day that Masada falls. And essentially the promised land, in other words, the change in the ownership of Judea, occurs just as it occurs in the very first cycle, where Moses gets to, at the end of 40 years, he gets to have the promised land. Well, in the New Covenant, and that's the title of the work, people call it the New Testament, but that's a mistranslation. The expression means New Covenant. In the New Covenant, the 40-year cycle with Jesus as the Passover lamb concludes with the fall of Masada, and the Romans now gain complete control over the land, and the New Covenant religion, which says to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to be peaceful, comes into effect. I mean, it's really pretty obvious political operation. It's mind control. It's an attempt at mind control. I don't think it worked very well in the first century, but, eventually Rome is able to get this thing as their state religion, and then they bring about the Dark Ages.
Exactly. Yeah. So you claim that Christianity was used to enslave Europe, and not only Europe, I think even larger parts of this planet.
Sure.
So it was all intentional from the start, from those Flavian emperors. Yeah.
Jan, look at it this way. You've got Constantine, getting all of this positive historical legacy because he starts the process by which Christianity becomes a state religion, right? Okay, So now he's also known for another thing. He created the edicts which brought about the feudal system. If you study the feudal system, you'll see that his edicts against what were referred to as the coloni are the origins of the feudal system. That's what brings about the condition whereby the peasants can't own land, they can't leave the land they're born on, their children can be sold, and they can't change vocations. This, of course, then eventually becomes the condition of the Dark Ages. But now look, in the Dark Ages, you have the Pontiff Maximus somehow has become the head of the feudal system. All of the hierarchical representations of the feudal system have the Pope or the Pontiff Maximus at the top. Well, the Pontiff Maximus is just another name for Caesar. So if you just stand back and look at what Constantine does, it is transparently obvious that Christianity was just a mechanism with the other edicts which are known to have created the feudal system. This one didn't have to do with the physical enslavement of the European population, but their mental enslavement. The Christian edict simply gave a religious context for slavery, so that the serf gave his food product, his work product, to the hierarchy, which ends up ultimately being controlled by the Pope, because he is a Christian. And so he doesn't have even the capacity to rebel any longer, because you have this religious device, Christianity, that stands between him and, recognizing that he's just been fooled, and he should rebel, but he cannot because of this religion. If you really just look at how Christianity functions in the Dark Ages, in the feudal system, and realize that it all stems back to this one individual, Constantine, it becomes very clear. And then if you actually look how the Flavian family, and incidentally Constantine, his name is Flavius Constantine, he's a Flavian. If you look at how the Flavian family produces Christianity at the beginning, that the Son of Man that Jesus predicts can only possibly be this one Flavian Caesar, there really isn't a lot of confusion. The Caesars created a structure whereby they use religion to ossify their power and to make people accept slavery as a religious condition.
And it worked extremely well. So
yeah, I'll say.
Yeah. So of course we see the backside of it, but I also have admiration for the people who used this very genius way to control the masses, and they still do, because when I try to explain to people that Jesus, as mentioned in the Bible, is not actually a person, not actually a human being, I get a lot of very very strong reactions from people. And
it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, obviously I get the same thing, and it's just amazing because if you ask them as to why, they can't even come up with a particularly reasonable explanation. They just do.
Exactly, but they nearly become angry with you or try to. Yeah. So about 10 years ago, your book came out about this very remarkable finding, the Caesar's Messiah, and then what happened next? Because I can assume that a lot of people try to prove you wrong and say that you are totally on the wrong track here. So how was it? What was the response to your book?
Oh, the response was it would sort of depend on where the person was coming from. Christian scholars universally disliked it. Mm-hmm. New Testament scholars that had other theories would not accept it. But quite a few scholars, I think, who didn't see any particular threat, started to support it, and then now what's happening is that I show that there's all these parallels between Jesus and this individual Titus Flavius's war campaign, and a lot of the events that I had described as part of this typological system, even though the scholars are not accepting the entire system, but they will more and more accept individual parallels. One of the parallels in Titus's campaign is 3 individuals being crucified, and they get taken down from the cross, and one miraculously survives. And I point out that this is just a typologic link to the Gospels, and that was, that parallel was dismissed at first, but now, more and more scholars, because of there's a lot of intrinsic, kind of complicated Greek parallelism that now is being accepted. And I think more and more people are beginning to sort of break down. The resistance to my thesis, if I had to characterize it, I would say it's starting to collapse. As an example, the physical journey that Jesus takes from Galilee to Jerusalem, where he spends some time outside of the city, then he goes into the city, and then he comes outside of the city. Well, in the typologic system that the Gospels represent, physical places occur, in a parallel sequence, and no one had really studied that before. That Jesus, they knew that he makes predictions about the war. They would say that, well, after the war, people would write, little embellishments to the character of Jesus Christ, and they would put these events from the war into the Gospels. But no one had bothered to look to actually try to map out just the physical journey. But now more and more people are doing that, and my position is very, very simple, because I really don't need to stand on any kind of theorizing or intellectual conception. I just show people the passages. Mm-hmm. I just show them the actual literature. Here is the literature. Here is this individual who predicts the Son of Man. Here's this other guy who says he's the Christ. Here is the fishing for men at the Sea of Galilee that Jesus predicts, and here is the passage in this guy's campaign where he comes to the Sea of Galilee and he physically fishes for men. I just show them the passages. And then, of course, there's many of the parallels are exactly the same. When Jesus says, the temple complex is going to be raised, not one stone atop another, and Titus comes to the area and raises all of the buildings, there's really not a lot you can do about it as far as arguing. And in terms of the sequence, well, again, it's just, you just lay one book next to another and anyone can do it. You don't need me at all. Just go through the process. So I've heard rumors about, individuals inside of, religious organizations that are trying to come up with some kind of defense against this, but I don't know. They don't contact me. I have another book coming out on the Pauline material in Revelation. I've been delaying putting that out because it's more complicated. The typology is more complicated in the Gospels, and I just want there to be a lot of people who sort of understand the simple level of typology that exists between the character of Jesus Christ and this guy, Titus Flavius. But it'll be out shortly, and then people can see that, that the character Paul and the zany book of Revelation are all in the same typologic genre. One of the problems is that the humor is very, very black and obscene, and so it's just difficult to bring out this these interpretations because they're simply so offensive to Christians when they see this. But This is just the humor that the Caesars possessed. It was a guttural and vicious kind of humor, and so it's unfortunate, but this is just the process we have to go through in order to understand what Christianity really is. I do think, and would hope you'd let me point out that, this is a very timely point for Christianity to be exposed, because Europe is obviously going through, a kind of neo-feudalism at this point. In my opinion, I think that understanding Christianity will sort of help the European individuals recognize the process they're in the midst of right now, so they can do something about it.
Exactly. You also, I think, are interested in what is happening now in the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope that resigned and the new Pope that has been elected. Do you have any comment on what's going on?
Well, I just cannot believe that they didn't ask me to come and cast a vote. And,
okay.
I would just hope that if any cardinal is listening, that they would correct the oversight next time that they go to elect a pope. Because for one thing, I just think that the church is in such disarray, and the pedophilia scandal, is not being addressed, and it needs to be. I don't know what kind of a future that organization can possibly have, but it should at least come clean and make honest disclosures about what has happened, who was protected, and help the victims of its actions recover. I also think that just Roman Catholicism is the very worst possible religion for Europe at this point. I know it's not, doesn't have a lot of power any longer, but to any extent is inappropriate, because, as I had mentioned, I just see a kind of neo-feudalism, coming down the road for Europe, and people need to be very clear-minded to defend themselves. They can't, have a lot of ideas in their minds which keep them from just very clearly and logically going through the events as they occur and try to find ways to protect themselves. So, I'm not. I really don't have any particular comment on the new pope. I noticed that he came from the Jesuit fraternity, which I don't think is leads me to an optimistic idea about what this guy is going to be doing. But I just think that the Catholic Church in general needs to start to come clean on what it has been as an organization, and it should try to help people understand its origins. That's one of the ways that the individuals who are inside the church now can redeem themselves, is to try to give people in the Christian world the real understanding of the origins of the religion, because I'm sure there are people inside it who do know the truth, and so this would be a step toward some kind of recovery of all of the negative effects that the organization has had.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also see it's not too easy, because people who are believers, they don't want to know because they think they already know something.
Right.
People who are not interested in Christianity, they are not interested in this story. So there's a very small group that is actually interested in knowing the real origin of Christianity. And
right, and of course it takes a long time to get to it. You have to spend some time, reading and doing historical analysis, and I mean, a lot of people are just too busy. There are just a lot of things that the religion is involved with that does have influence and impact on everyone's lives. So I would just argue that everyone should spend enough time to have an informed opinion about the religion. And certainly, it's like when you were saying you meet someone who has this idea that Jesus was a historical character. I just think that the right approach is to politely ask that individual to defend the position. I think we have to try to remove as many untrue ideas as possible from our minds. I guess you can tell that I am very troubled about our present moment, and I just worry about the quality of our thinking. And even though Christianity is not at the center of the neo-feudalism that Europe faces at the moment, it certainly doesn't help anything. And so I would hope that all of us, who have sort of the understanding of the inability of the Catholic Church to present any evidence that Jesus was a historical character, to just point that out to people who are experiencing this individual Jesus Christ, who are either think that he's historical or think that he may have been a god. This just doesn't take us to a good place. These kinds of beliefs, and so I think we all have the responsibility to try to help us all think more clearly.
Yeah, again, Joe, I'm fully on the same page here, but I also like to comment that I see the process of dumbing down of humanity is increasing. So,
sure.
Yeah, first of all, you need your brain to be working good, both left and right hemisphere, but also you need to have time and energy to do your own research. And I see that less and less people are, first of all, capable of doing their own research, and second, don't have their energy or the time to do it. So it's very, very hard to bring out this kind of information to people who are incapable of understanding or too lazy to do their own work.
Boy, I just couldn't agree more, and it's a real problem. I think that I'm hoping that the events in Cyprus over the weekend will start to wake up the European public that there is just something fundamentally wrong in the political class, that they need to start thinking about maintaining their freedom, about understanding who these individuals are. If you think back to when the Dark Ages were being established, what could the serfs or the individuals who were farmers and peasants, what could they have done to prevent it? Well, one thing they could have done certainly would have been to spread the information among themselves that the religion that was being used as the mind control device was fake. So that's an example of sort of, what the citizens can do. I think in our current situation, people should start to think about, how did the debt that is so crushing upon all the populations, where does it come from?
Mm-hmm.
Why is the money that is invented out of thin air something that gives the EU controllers the ability to go into the citizens' checking accounts in Cyprus and take out money? How does this come about? Because it seems to me that it just goes into not good thinking on the parts of the citizens. You end up with money out of nowhere that suddenly becomes the debt that enslaves you and your children. This strikes me very much as the condition that occurred in the first, third, fourth, and fifth century with the Dark Ages, where you're given Jesus, it looks like a good idea, and then suddenly you find yourself giving all of your work product to the Pontiff Maximus. So it's just, it's very troubling to me to watch it, and I would hope that people who are, readers of Jezus-mythe who've enjoyed the book or who got some value out of it would try to take that perspective and apply it to our present situation and try to help the populations in general just think more clearly about what we have to do in order to maintain our freedoms.
Exactly. Also, maybe the boiled frog syndrome is maybe applicable here because
absolutely, everything is done with just this, very slowly, one small step. I think that's why Cyprus was chosen, because it's such a tiny place. It's so easy to control. They put these ideas into motion. People suddenly start to accept them. They're not so radical. It's not slavery. It's just if you look at it over a 20, 30-year period, then suddenly, yes, we went from being free to slaves. So, you just can't be, in my opinion, too hypersensitive to having rights taken away by governments. You look at Christianity and you see how the lure of power warped these individuals, how they became enslavers of all of the European population. And the lesson, I think, is just clear. You just have to always mistrust politicians. You have to mistrust their motivations. I was asked a couple of days ago on another show, well, what would be the one thing that could have been done in the 3rd century with Christianity that you would recommend being done today? And what I said is that in the 3rd century, what would have really given people the understanding as to what was happening to them would have been to have had DNA testing of all the bishops and popes and then the Roman patricians, because that would have shown, without a shadow of a doubt, that all of these people belong to the same families. And I would say that would be what I would recommend today. What are the actual connections between our political class? Now, they don't invite me to their parties. I don't know that this is, in fact true, but it would be the very first thing I would want to find out is, are they related? Because that would be a kind of physical representation of conspiracy that the common person just couldn't avoid thinking about. So that's that would be the first step that I would do, is see if you could get a nice sampling of these individuals, and then ask them to present cotton swabs so you could test them to see just how related they are.
Are you familiar, Joe, with the work of David Icke?
Yes.
Yeah, he did also some research about it, and it was astonishing how much bloodline relation there was between United States presidents, royal family in England, and many other families. So,
yeah, exactly. Because this is just say, for example, that the Cyprus finance minister and current prime minister is related to Draghi in Italy. That's something that in a democracy you just have to know, because it is prima facie. In other words, it's just self-evident that there is a relationship that is hidden and problematic for a good political representation of the people. Now, in the 3rd century, these tests weren't available, but they are now. So, I am not, accusing anyone of anything. I am simply saying that it should be done. The citizens should be suspicious. We should want to know if, Angela Merkel is related to Tony Blair. So, that would be one of the very first steps. And I also think that, if Christianity, if it becomes sort of widely understood that this was a government psychological operation, then perhaps that would be sort of a platform that would lead to just better and more suspicious and more critical thinking on the parts of all of the European populations regarding their political class. Because, it's always the case that we are misled to wars and to slaveries. We don't volunteer. We're always misled. The Dark Ages weren't brought about because the serfs needed to have some powerful centralized government to help them with their farming. This was something they were misled into by the religious forces that had been put around them. Mm-hmm. So, I think we should be very concerned that we're being misled again, that there's an agenda in back of all of this, and that, a kind of neo-Christianity, neo-feudalism is about to descend upon us. I mean, just absolutely clear to me is that these individuals who had, who sit in power in the EU bureaucracy, they have the power of arithmetic. They knew that the debt could not be paid back. So what was the agenda? There had to, they said, well, the people were asking for all of these free things and we were just financing the debt. That just doesn't ring true. They knew that they were going to get to this moment. They knew that eventually Europe would not be able to pay back the debt. They were well aware of that. So what was the agenda? And if you just stand back and look at this and you think, well, the Europeans in many of the countries sort of lost their capacity for self-reliance. They were able to use the euro as a free source of income. They could create these government programs which they couldn't really afford, but they would be papered over with all this free money. Well, that may have just been bad political governance, but isn't it at least worth considering that it was a plan? That we are now at a position where in Greece, in Spain, and all of these the periphery European countries, that there really isn't a lot of employment. There's not a lot of jobs and businesses because there didn't need to be. When the Europe with the human face, so-called socialism, was offered to the people, they gave up on these methods of self-reliance, and so now. With it ending, there seems, of course, there will be this, we have to centralize. We need to give more and more power in the hands of fewer and fewer. I just, to me, it just, the first thing I would think of is that this is a plan, that this will ossify incredible power in the hands of very few people. And so let's test them. Let's have Europe, be given some real data about these people. Who are they? What is their actual relationship? You see, so that would be I think it was good advice in the 3rd century, and it's good advice today.
Exactly, because what you see coming now is another dark age.
Neo-feudalism for sure.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There is a plan behind all this, and this plan has been taken out, has been planned very carefully, and has been performed very, very step by step, very gradually.
Exactly, and the problem is that we can't see the motivation behind the plan. There's all of this confusion about the financial crisis and this facade of democracy. Excuse me, but who are the people that will benefit? What is their relationship to one another? We have the technology at this point to really make sure that these people represent us. What is their ethnicity? What is their family relationships? I mean, at this point, when we are just, really walking into an absolute catastrophe, these questions are no longer theoretical. They should be something that every European should be afraid of. I mean, it was not even 100 years ago that Europe wandered into its Holocaust. There's the Holocaust of the Jewish people is well represented in the media. but the Holocaust of the European that World War I and World War II represented is also something that should be considered, particularly by Europeans at this point. Because I think that it isn't just a neo-feudalism that we're entering into, but an era of dramatic population reduction. So, I hate to be so negative, but I am just very troubled by what I see, and would hope that Europeans would just do everything they possibly can to make sure we don't enter into another European Holocaust.
Maybe a strange question at this moment, Joe, but are you familiar with the Georgia Guidestones?
The Georgia, those are the monuments?
Yeah, the big stones with in 8 different languages.
They talk about 500,000 people at the end of the, some process.
500 million, yes.
500 million, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I am familiar with them.
Yeah. And what is remarkable, the group of people who are doing this, they are really fond of the number 33. And this Friday, coming Friday, March 22, it's exactly 33 years ago that they were erected, when they were placed there. And 322 is also the number of Skull and Bones, the secret society of Yale University.
Exactly. And again, that's another institution that there should be testing of the individuals who were members of it to see what the actual family and ethnic relationships are, that the organization, to see how the organization is functioning. Because if you look at that organization in terms of the United States, it has power everywhere. Mm-hmm. In our military, in our political, in our financial, in our media. So again, it's just good democracy to understand bias. It's very interesting. In the United States, we have many laws to protect against bias for African Americans, for example. All sorts of quotas and different ways of knowing if one ethnicity is not represented. But when you look at these secret organizations, Skull and Bones being a good example, where is the ethnic disclosure about that organization? Right? Yes. So I would think that, people who do not want to have another Holocaust of Europeans and want to have democracy based upon honest disclosure would try to get to the bottom of these things, would just to answer these fundamental questions about is there family relationships, is there ethnic relationships, what are the actual sort of foundations of these things. And David Icke, I've never spoken with him, and I don't really follow him very closely, but I have looked at enough of stuff to kind of get the gist of it. And I think he really it isn't a question of being right. It's a question of whether or not this is a necessary step for real democracy. I mean, all of my suspicions could be wrong, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't go through with the process of making absolutely sure. Because, you see, we really can't trust anyone, you see. We do have only our own common sense to defend us, and therefore we need as much information as we can. Excuse me. So, because I study the origins of Christianity, I look at our present moment in that context, and what I see are many parallels, and they frighten me. So I would just hope that what was good advice in hindsight can be used now with, perhaps some foresight to not walk into a situation where the Georgia monuments prophecies are brought about, because to get to 500 million people, you have to have 6.5 billion people die. Mm-hmm. That seems to be big price to pay. So would rather not go through that process, and think it's time for the citizens to be, active and alert. I really, the thing in Cyprus, I don't know, but I'm hopeful that this will, create some more energy in the parts of the citizens. And also that they will stop, you can see the obvious divide and conquer that the citizens at the periphery, the people in Cyprus who are having their money taken are told that, well, this is because the Germans want it, right? Whereas the German citizenry are being told, well, the pig nation populations are so lazy, that they're wrecking the value of your euro. The fact is that this is a financialization problem that comes from an organization that is pan-national. It has nothing to do with the Germans or the Cyprus or the Greeks. I mean, it is specifically concentrated within a few thousand individuals, most of whom are from banking families and political class individuals. Pretty small group, and I think we should try to know everything we can about them. I'll just give you another example. Bilderberg, all of these industrialists that meet, that's another situation that should be investigated, just on the principles of democracy. If you have a tremendous wealth and have tremendous power, then you should be happy to make sure that the people know that the financial connections you have are not based on bias. They're not based on, some hidden agenda. Anyway, so, we really have a lot of work to do in terms of democracy. And I just wanted to say, how much I appreciate you and your show. I just wish I could really find words to thank you, Johan, because these shows are really giving an alternative to the media that is controlled by the political and financial classes. So, you're doing wonderful work, and as long as we have access to the people and we can try to give them information, we should just fight as hard as we can to try to use our opportunity as best we can. So if, in a couple of years we're sitting here and there's 500 million people on the planet, at least we can say we did our best.
Yeah. In Germany, when the war was on in Germany, it said, "Wir haben es nicht gewusst." We did not know it. That was a famous line after the war, because most people said we had no idea what was going on. And we use that German sentence a lot to make people aware that you have now the chance to know. You can know actually what is going on. So
exactly.
There is no excuse to say later on that you had no idea.
Exactly, and so this is why, again, just you should be praised and your radio show should be praised, because it's helping people understand that they just have to pay more attention to the to how democracy is actually operating, to how our currency is being established, and what's being done with it. All of these things are just completely fundamental to our lives, and so we need to really know. We need to know everything we can about the people in power. We just need to have much, I think, more scrutiny, and of course we need to scrutinize their train of thought. The whole idea of bailing out nations that can't afford the debt that they have with more debt. I mean, that idea is so preposterous. I mean, it's being sold as a legitimate financial maneuver, even if it's, not one that's ever going to be successful. But you see, I don't believe that. I think that I just cannot believe that the people who are presenting this idea are that stupid. So that means that there is an agenda. Well, what is the agenda? I mean, we need to demand an explanation as to why the debt is continuing to skyrocket, and yet it's obvious that it can never succeed as a financial process. So there's never going to be enough economy to pay back all of this debt, and yet more debt is being created all the time. So what is the goal here? Is the goal evil? Is the goal to take us to a point where the euro stops working altogether? And then, of course, in that situation, what occurs? Well, you need centralized government. And amazingly, perhaps the same people that brought the euro to us and had it then collapse will want to be the ones to take power in a dictatorial sense. Mm-hmm. But you see, that would be, I don't think, in the interest of the citizens. So we need to know a lot more about the class of people who are our politicians and who have these powers in terms of our currency.
Yes, I do think so. The problem, however, is when you try to make journalists interested in this, they think you are some kind of conspiracy theorist. And
of course. Well, the whole idea of making conspiracy theory ridiculous, who benefits from that? Mm-hmm. I mean, every corporation engages in conspiracy because it doesn't want its competition to know the plans it has to succeed in the market. So, I think that it's a very difficult thing, Johan, and all we can do is our best, but we should try to take advantages of the crises, of the situation, for example, is having in Cyprus, to take advantage of the energy that creates in people, to then get them past the point where they will see conspiracy theories as ridiculous, and get them to admit that they honestly don't know anything about the character Jesus Christ, and they honestly don't really know anything about the character named Angela Merkel. So we have to kind of start with that principle that we really don't have enough information and we need a lot more. And then beyond that, we just have to try to, whenever there is thinking that is just patently irrational, we have to try to stand up against it. When the EU ministers create another bailout, more debt for Cyprus, and then more debt for Greece, and more debt for Spain, when the debt is more than 130% of a gross national product that's declining, then this is not just a bad economic idea. It smacks. It really demands suspicion as a hidden agenda, because those people have the power of arithmetic. They can add and subtract. They know that this is not sustainable. They know that the economies are going to collapse. They know that the euro will stop working, and they probably, and I would bet my life on it, have a plan as to what they want to happen when this occurs. So these are the terrible realities that the citizens, all across Europe and across the United States and across England, that all of us are facing right now. So, we can only do what we can do, Johan, and hopefully there will be a genius and an energy that will emerge from the people that will come from them before there is a massive reduction in population.
Very good. Thank you very much for sharing this information, Joe. I was thinking before the broadcast that we will talk mostly about Jesus, but we've talked about the actual situation in Europe a lot, so that's really great.
Well, it happens. Yeah. I mean, Jesus is a funny character, isn't it?
Indeed, he was. So I'm really happy with this interview, Joe.
Well, thank you very much, Johan. Thank you for having me.
It was great. It will also be online from tomorrow morning on, so I will send you a link. Your website is also available, as it's mentioned in the description, Jezus-mythe.com. So people who want to know more about your work, they will surely find your website.
One thing, you can buy the book in German. It was published by Ullstein. The title is Das Messias Ratzel.
Okay.
If anyone wants to read it in German, it's available.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think most Dutch people prefer to read in English, but maybe some prefer to...
Well, particularly with my translation in German, they definitely would rather read it in English, I tell you.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you very much again, and hope to stay in touch with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Dit is Ergens Over Radio.